Imagine stealing 3% of your country's entire GDP, not through a corporation, not by accident, but as one man. This isn't the plot of a Hollywood thriller. It's the real-life story of Teodorin Obiang, son of the long-standing president of Equatorial Guinea and the poster child for elite corruption on a scale almost too large to comprehend. From multi-million-dollar mansions to private jets, golden cars, and even Michael Jackson's glove. This is the unbelievable saga of how one man became richer than some nations, while most of his people live in poverty. This is the story of the man who stole 3% of his country's GDP. Equatorial Guinea, a small Central African nation, was for decades a forgotten country, one of the least developed in the world. In the 1980s, it was a place where families survived on subsistence farming, basic infrastructure barely existed, and economic hope was little more than a fantasy. But then came the 1990s, and with it, oil. In 1995, massive offshore oil reserves were discovered off the coast. American oil companies, including ExxonMobil, quickly swooped in. Contracts were signed, drills went to the seabed, and the cash began to pour in. For a brief moment, the future seemed bright. The country's GDP ballooned. Between 1997 and 2007, Equatorial Guinea became one of the fastest-growing economies on the planet. Billions of dollars were flowing into state coffers every year. But instead of ushering in a golden era of development, it triggered something else entirely: a deepening of inequality, corruption, and elite control. The riches didn't build new hospitals or fix broken schools. They didn't fund public housing or clean water systems. Instead, the country's vast new wealth became the personal bank account of one family, the Obiangs. And at the center of it all was the president's son, Teodorin. Teodorin Obiang Mangue, born into power, raised in privilege, groomed for control. His father, President Teodoro Obiang Basogo, seized power in 1979 after overthrowing his own uncle in a bloody coup. Under his rule, political opposition was crushed, elections were rigged, and corruption became state policy. As the eldest son, Teodorin was handed top government positions before he had the credentials to hold them. In his 20s, he was named Minister of Forestry and Agriculture. These weren't symbolic roles. These ministries controlled lucrative sectors tied to the country's timber exports and agricultural subsidies. Later, Teodorin would be promoted to second vice president and eventually first vice president, putting him next in line for the presidency. But in reality, his main job wasn't governance. It was accumulation. Accumulation of contracts, wealth, power, and above all, money. He controlled vast revenues from logging and oil deals. His ministries were conduits for overbilling, kickbacks, and sweetheart contracts. And instead of investing in the country, Teodorin turned Equatorial Guinea's oil windfall into his personal fortune. And what did he spend it on? Well, imagine if a Bond villain had a baby with an Instagram influencer. Teodorin didn't just spend money, he detonated it. Let's start in Malibu, California, one of the most expensive zip codes in the United States. There, he bought a mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Price tag? $30 million US. The home featured 9 bathrooms, a wine cellar, and a pool with ocean views. That was just his vacation house. His personal Gulfstream G5 jet, purchased for $38 million, allowed him to bounce between continents in private luxury. On board, Italian leather seats, gold-plated fixtures, and a full entertainment suite. Then came the cars. A garage that could rival royalty. Ferraris, Bentleys, Lamborghinis. A $2 million Bugatti Veyron dipped in gold. Yes, gold. In 2011 alone, he reportedly spent over $10 million on luxury vehicles. In Paris, Teodorin acquired a historic mansion near the Champs-Élysées, a sprawling property with marble staircases, a private nightclub, an indoor pool, and a cinema. French prosecutors would later value it at over $100 million. And then there was the bizarre, like his $275,000 spree on Michael Jackson memorabilia. Among the pieces, the King of Pop's crystal-encrusted glove, stage costumes, and life-sized statues. This wasn't just a rich man buying toys. This was someone sending a message: I can do whatever I want. While Teodorin was partying in Paris and cruising the California coastline, life in Equatorial Guinea told a very different story. Over 75% of the population lived below the poverty line. In rural areas, children had to walk miles just to find clean water. Electricity was unreliable, sometimes non-existent. The country's infant mortality rate ranked among the highest in the world. Basic healthcare was out of reach for most families. Women gave birth in poorly equipped clinics, often without running water or trained nurses. Public schools, where they existed, were dilapidated and overcrowded. Desks were broken, books were outdated, and teachers were underpaid, when they were paid at all. Even in the capital, Malibu, the divide between the ruling elite and the general population was jarring. Shiny government buildings sat beside slums. Presidential motorcades sped past barefoot children begging for coins. And those who dared speak out against the regime, journalists, activists, students, were met with harassment, arrests, or worse. Equatorial Guinea wasn't just poor. It was intentionally kept poor so that the few at the top could stay fabulously rich. So how exactly did Teodorin extract this much wealth from a single nation? The answer lies in a tangled web of corruption, front companies, and global financial loopholes. Investigators discovered that Teodorin often used shell corporations to funnel public contracts into entities he controlled. A road-building company would charge the government 10 times the normal rate, then kick the excess cash back to his accounts. He also created front firms to manage state resources. Forestry licenses were granted to companies owned by his associates, who in turn transferred profits to offshore banks in his name. Real estate abroad? Purchased under aliases or shell entities registered in Panama, the Cayman Islands, or Hong Kong, places known for banking secrecy. Even luxury purchases were structured to avoid scrutiny. Cars were bought through intermediaries. Yachts were registered under foreign flags. His Gulfstream jet was leased through a holding company. And for years, banks across the globe either didn't know or didn't care where the money came from. The global financial system was his playground.
L'affaire des biens mal acquis. La Cour de cassation a donc rejeté le recours de Teodorin Obiang. L'instance confirme donc la condamnation du vice-président de Guinée équatoriale. Il avait été l'an dernier condamné à 3 ans de prison avec sursis. Une amende de 30 millions d'euros lui avait aussi été imposée pour s'être bâti un immense patrimoine ici à Paris en détournant notamment de l'argent de son pays. Bonjour à vous, Karim Akiki. Vous avez suivi cette affaire pour France 24.
Par exemple, la Suisse avait restitué 650 millions de dollars aux Philippines ou encore des sommes au Nigeria. Donc la prochaine étape après cette décision de la Cour de cassation qui clôt l'affaire, deuxièmement, c'est de restituer l'argent au peuple équato-guinéen.
For a long time, the world simply looked away. But eventually, Teodorin's empire became too large and too ridiculous to ignore. In the early 2010s, the U.S. Justice Department launched Operation Kleptocracy, a bold initiative aimed at seizing the assets of corrupt foreign officials. Teodorin was one of its first big targets. In 2014, American authorities seized over $70 million worth of his assets. Among them, his Malibu mansion, his fleet of exotic cars, and dozens of luxury items. France, too, began its own investigation. In 2016, Teodorin was formally charged with laundering tens of millions of euros through French real estate. He didn't show up in court, but in 2017, he was convicted in absentia and handed a suspended 3-year prison sentence, and many of his French assets, including a mansion worth over 100 million euro, were seized. Swiss prosecutors seized his yachts. Brazilian officials questioned him over undeclared assets. The once untouchable prince was finally facing the consequences, at least in courtrooms abroad. You might expect someone in that position to lay low. Not Teodorin. He doubled down. He posted images of his new watches. He flew to music festivals in Europe. He took selfies with celebrities. His message was clear. I'm still here, and I'm still rich. Back home, the government played its part. They called the investigations racist. They claimed Western powers were targeting African leadership out of jealousy and imperialism. But the people weren't buying it. To many inside and outside the country, this wasn't about race or colonial baggage. This was daylight robbery. Teodorin's image, once carefully crafted as a modern African prince, had curdled into something darker, a caricature of excess, detachment, and greed. Teodorin's story may be shocking, but it's not rare. Across the globe, from Angola to Venezuela, the so-called resource curse plays out again and again. Natural wealth, instead of being a blessing, becomes a magnet for corruption. In Angola, Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of the former president, became the richest woman in Africa through similar schemes. In Venezuela, oil wealth empowered elites while the population starved. In each case, the pattern is the same. Massive state resources, weak institutions, zero accountability, and a small circle of individuals who profit from the chaos. And almost always, they're helped by a network of international enablers, lawyers, consultants, bankers, who turn dirty money into beachfront homes. Today, Teodorin is still the vice president of Equatorial Guinea, and many believe he's being positioned to take over from his aging father. He remains banned from entering certain countries, including the US and parts of Europe. But at home, his influence is growing, not shrinking. His spending might have slowed. His Instagram posts might be more discreet. But make no mistake, Teodorin hasn't gone anywhere. The story of Teodorin Obiang is not just a tale of excess. It's a warning. It shows what happens when power is inherited, not earned, when wealth is stolen, not shared, and when the institutions that are supposed to stop corruption become tools to protect it. It also forces us to ask hard questions. What role do foreign powers play in enabling this theft? Why do our banks accept this money? And why, even now, is Teodorin still free? In Equatorial Guinea, the oil still flows, the money still moves. But for the people, the true owners of that wealth, justice remains a distant dream. Thanks for watching. This is Profit and Deceit. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories about money, power, and the people caught in between.